So take the example of the mom saying, I walk past your room, I'll say it needs a little sweeping and dusting, right? Now we hear that and we're like, oh, the mom has clearly asked the kid to clean the room. But that's not literally what the mom said. The mom said it needs sweeping and dusting. And so a kid who's not engaging in social cognition, because that part of their brain is shut off, could say, yeah, you're right. It needs sweeping and dusting. I wonder who's going to do it. Right? Because that's the literal response.
Yeah.
That's not the implied response. And so it's as though nagging is causing this, like, I don't know, nagging induced frontal lobotomy, where there's a temporary loss of ability to plan ahead and to listen to what someone else wants you to be doing. And it's not really the fault of the kid. It's their brain reacting to the threat to status and respect that's coming from both the tone and the words. And that causes a frustrating situation because the mom's like, I told you very clearly to clean your room. And the kid's like, who is this lunatic yelling at me for something they didn't tell me to do?